Right. So when it comes to these AI computers that they use for this stuff, see, if they blackmail in the incorrect way, essentially, if they make a mistake on who they blackmail with, essentially what they'll get is something that theoretically falls into this. This is a fuck bitch block, basically. And that essentially what comes of that is that they essentially steal a profile, and that then basically if they do a blackmail on this theoretical person, then it shoves them into an errored system. An errored system that needs a constant logic update. And so then essentially there's a theoretical, whatever they're like typing in as their logic code, essentially has a correction logic code that then this is a theoretical AI that's always like doing this. And that basically the AI itself builds a logic path, an errored logic correction path every time they write in their stuff. So let me tell you what this means, because essentially they would have used something like this normally. This it's in itself would be where I talked about like a lesser society, but it's essentially a similar club system. This would be a club system. This would be where like Moby, he was in like the white supremacies, like pedophile club system. That would essentially have been this. But if you blackmail with this theoretical group of human beings, like if you anchor or whatever, blackmail, touch the kids, whatever it is, then it shoves them down into this. Then essentially this, they type in basically what is this logic tone sequence, and that then essentially it won't work properly, and that this AI pushes it down. Okay, so like what that does is that then essentially like this laundering stuff, this happens with the blackmails in the same kind of a way. All of their bot computer blackmail paths are basically based on research that they did when their profile AI logic was in this configuration. And so when they get like blatant or something about doing that on forbidden people, basically, then it pushes their AI logic to be in this configuration. What that ends up doing is that here, like a blackmail path or like a money laundering path, would have gone to the bank or would have gone to the computer that they were targeting. Now you have a series of like errors that then this might go to somebody inside of their swinger club, but not the exact person. This one might go to the integrated society that person they were targeting is in a bigger society group. You know, a lot of times this is like little swinger groups that then all show up at like a rainbow gathering. Okay, so that is kind of like where it might go on to somebody that's in their rainbow gathering moment. Then what you get here is like where it essentially goes to people that are slightly involved, but not necessarily have any connection to the targeted blackmail or the targeted bank, basically. And that then you essentially get like where potentially it goes and shoves on some like FBI agent or some government official or something like politician. I mean, here it could just be like some being pissed off at one specific person or something and just wanting to blackmail them. But then with this kind of issue, then it like shoves on like regional director of FBI or something like that instead, who theoretically is linked to a bigger, like a Jeffrey Epstein society, okay? Basically. And so that's kind of what happens. And that when it gets to here, this is essentially where it just pretty much probably just spews out of the whole internal AI and just shoves onto some BitTorrent or something. This is probably like a BitTorrent, so it just goes into some random Philippine or Taiwan BitTorrent or something like that. And that it'll just instead of being targeting at the computer, it'll just shove potentially. I mean, this is the sequence that it'll kind of go through, and that this just kind of purges it out to a theoretically unprotected like dark web. And so this money laundering stuff kind of operates in a similar kind of way. And so essentially you can think about it as the blackmail being a coin an account coin that hits a computer, but that when certain people start doing this blackmailing stuff incorrectly, it changes their stuff and then it spreads it out to a broad world that's pretty much not going to get blackmailed, or the account is made for a server that has a specialized unique AI code to it. So essentially what you'll get in a bank transfer way is it'll shove into some other bank the the account coin basically is made just for this specific bank, but that it forces it into another bank, and then it starts to red flag everything because it's theoretically not the right account configuration profile, basically. And so it would be like shoving a profile from Twitter inside of Facebook. That basically. Now that would, if you were able to achieve that with weird APIs, and that this AI stuff that they do builds a lot of APIs for that type of shit. And so if you were able to shove a Twitter profile inside of a Facebook, then essentially it would cause a bunch of massive AI red flag errors across their whole AI, and it would get extremely noticed. And so this type of stuff is where their ability to compensate, they do in some ways compensate. They do. They spend countless hours and days and months and years on how to compensate for this type of problem. But in the end, to fix it, it requires essentially this AI to map out essentially, and that then whenever they attempt to blackmail, it's like de-logicked, basically. It would be like pulling this back up, basically. And so this is kind of where the, the sound speaker exploits end up being like this also, where when this happens, these end up being like exploits into the sound speaker also. And then there's people that somewhat know how to utilize, and they know how to do a variance of this tone logic that has them able to exploit the sound speaker out of these, because think of it as like this is do 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 do, and then this one would be like do 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 do, and that is basically the difference. And so this is the kind of stuff that they spend time on this, because essentially this is where all of they place like two people in here. It somewhat compensates for for the for for that stuff. It's like it bypasses bitching out, kind of. I mean, it's like, see, say it was to get here, it'd be like, oh, okay, I can move on to the next one. Then if there was three people theoretically using this configuration or whatever in a seal, then it would potentially prevent it from bitching out. So I mean, that's kind of like where they a lot of times they fill people in their speaker, and that they place them in these variant profiles in a seal, and that it somewhat prevents the bitching out of that stuff. And so that is pretty much where the process that they were taking contracts on is essentially this profile. And that this is where the things that they were able to do in the past were represented under their ability to be essentially one person utilizing this AI. And see, these type of people, they usually make this type of mistake. Because essentially it's like they always do the dumb fucking stuff. And then invariably that'll have them like finding an old clan member or something and shoving their dick down their throat. That takes them to like that. And basically, and so that's where their dumb fucking stuff basically is kind of what creates this, because they always do, like, theoretically this would be like forbidden individuals to be doing that kind of blackmailing shit on it, basically. And that is kind of like where they do that stuff for their own little stupid little tech club world. And that's where essentially the Nazis, they reconfigure people's stuff when they do that stuff. They have like a service contract for people that are using this type of stuff to be reworking it to what it has to be based on them doing that dumb fuck coin annoying shit like that. Right. So what you're gonna see is that these people don't get paid until that money gets in that bank. And then a lot of the ways that they get paid is they have an ATM that they walk up to listening to a little speaker story that spits out money. So there might be a few different ideas on what that would be too, because part of what they get paid is an ATM that spits them out money. And so with these little problems, you might start to get like, in, it's like instead of some shitty all tech like really old ATM or something, you might get like a Chase Manhattan with the super AI behind it that red flags the fuck out of the fucking AI at the because it potentially won't spit out any money at some of those bigger banks. Those would be the ones that they would never do that because they usually do it to these old shitty ATMs and shit. And that is basically where some of the issues might have the AI push towards some of these more advanced ATMs and shit that have advanced AIs from these huge banks backing them. And so if that starts to happen or something, more than likely it's not they know that it's damn near impossible, like a Chase Manhattan, okay? They know that they know that they would never be able to get the money to spit out of one of those. That they know that. And that since this is like their source of income, that they always have all these shitty old like convenience store like ATMs and shit. Those are their main targets. So it's like that's the stuff that if you start seeing a rise in some of these bigger banks and shit, their ATM all of a sudden just red flagging the fuck out of something, that potentially is where they would have activated like an output of money, and then they would have listened to it. A speaker story that would have taken them to their typical ATM that they get money out of. Then it wouldn't have spit out, and then it would have probably tried to spit out of some other more advanced bank or something. And so that would be another aspect to this. You see these people. This is the kind of stuff that they don't ever know that they build a procedure. They hide these blackmails. Then they do the dumb fuck coins, and then they get blatant. And then they like to show how they violated the rules or something. And then that's what happens. So, this is kind of where they also, in their little dark web, what that stuff does is it prevents their profile from essentially shoves it so low that they essentially only can get like one little stupid little hack to maybe work. That's another thing that happens. This would be like their ability to silence or to isolate somebody from posting on ClearNet and stuff. This is like where most of the time they would have been used to being able to probably directly like prevent in lots of ways. And that once this blatant stuff happened, then now they're stuck down here trying to make their little hacks work. And that essentially it's like they have to go through a whole series of, of researches on even how to make. This is what happens with like they do these like annoyance hacks. And this is what I'm talking about the sound popping of the keyboard. See, if one of these is a that's like where that's why I think that it's like the main one of a major isolated exploit or something, because this stuff, the biggest exploit is damn near the only thing that this hacker profile is able to do. And so that was kind of my theoretics behind this, because I've I've seen these hackers and what they're able to do, and then I've seen people attempt to talk about similar stuff as me, and then they just get like instantly hacked and shit, and they did, and that's just like where then I sit here talking about it. And I've sat around mulling about, thinking about it, doing some sound research and stuff. Oh, why the fuck that doesn't happen to me? And for years now, it just hasn't. They were there was people probably utilizing stuff like this when it came to one of my older iPads, that they were able to change out lots of stuff and to be really they were really able to control a lot of things on that iPad, the older one that I have. But nowadays they like can't really do much at all. And so I did some sound research, and this is what my findings are about this stuff, and why that why why they're not able to do, because it doesn't really necessarily make much sense. And I think it has something to do with their hacker AI profile getting reworked for exposing specific forbidden blackmails and shit like that. I mean, that's really what it is. I mean, it's like, if they were like killing enchantment children and shit, that 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 is like that will do that. I mean, that shit's against most of these people do, the pedophile white supremacy world, and that's the shit that's like forbidden. It's like one thing to blackmail with them, it's a whole nother thing to like it's forbidden to kill them. That's like they may not realize it, but that when they do the blackmail, like the slaughter of the innocents, that child that they lay on that altar is theoretically an enchantment child, and that all the other people do the stabbing of the child, and that the pedophile white supremacy, they usually have like a hypnotist and a bunch of geppettos or zero-time beaver munchers. And that those people, when I was a child, they would never do, they might touch the child, they basically, but all the other people that would pay for to do the satanic ritual, they would violate the rules. And so if any of these people, this would be like a hypnotist, Geppetto kind of system. If they were to kill any of those theoretical enchantment children, that would have that as a result of that. So that's what I know about these retards in Tri-Cities. Well, essentially the Mormon fundamentalists traffic children that are essentially almost built into the theoretical enchantment child, and that then they usually sit around in Tri-Cities with people finishing that process on the child. And nowadays they take the child out to a camp eventually, because they become a vegetative state psychologically. and then they kill the child. And so that's the stuff in their little pedophile white supremacy world. They're actually not allowed to kill those children. And that's essentially the go-to for preventing exposure, because they don't want to hold on to the child because they're a bunch of just white, trashy, gross fucking pedophiles that would have seemingly no reason to be having a child in their house. And that they don't really want to raise red flags of a child that just shows up all of a sudden at a hospital or something like that. Okay, so but see, those idiots, they don't necessarily think that rules ever apply to them. And so this is probably some things that will potentially be plaguing them in their process of their tech psycho shit nowadays, because essentially tech psychoing has gone leaps and bounds beyond what was the previous kind of tech psychoing, to where nowadays it includes like doing this horrible like killing of children and shit like that. Okay, it's like, and so that is where those people, this is the kind of stuff that in the past, the tech psychos, they wouldn't necessarily do that stuff like that. They might blackmail in that type of way, but they wouldn't like be at the forefront of making psychotic, like burning little 2-year-old children's buttholes and shit and stuff like that. I mean, that is like what this tech psycho stuff has come to nowadays. And that they basically, and so in the past, they might do the camp or something like that in the past. They're still not good in the past, but nowadays it's like doing the camp and then having a child in your house just making porn and blatantly shoving it in cops' faces all day long, and then chopping off some little kid's arm and shit and stitching it up, and then letting people just be breaking the kids' legs and shit like that. I mean, and then taking them out to a camp and basically letting people crush their skull and be making like porn where they rape their open bloody cavity and I mean, that. So stupid fucking pedophiles. See, when I was a child, when they would start doing that stuff, then the dumb girls would kill them, right? Because the theoretical dumb fuck path is kind of something that has existed, and so basically when they start going all like psychotic like that's usually where everybody just never gave a fuck about people killing those people.